Hi, I'm Michelle Keltz from the Real Estate Store.
And I'm Michelle Clippert from the Real Estate Store. Here we are with two Michelles.
Yay!
Yay for us! And here we are for Real Talk for Real Estate. And today we were going to talk about some closing fees. Because both buyer and seller come up with fees when they end up at the closing table. And like Michelle was telling me this morning, a lot of times your buyers are a little bit surprised, depending on what kind of buyer we have, whether it's a cash buyer or a lender, someone with a loan. Fees are very different for both those entities. So we were going to go over some of the things, and mind you, it's going to be related to the price of the home. It's going to be related to your lender. So some of these things get a little bit fixed, but others are variables because they're based on that, the price of the home and things like that.
I think, and this came up with me just because I had a situation where I was on the buyer side, and she was like, I can't believe how much money I need to have in order to close. I was not aware of that. And so I thought, well, maybe we should make some people a little bit more aware and help them out a little bit, just kind of give them an idea. But a lot of these things, like she said, are specific, and so the lender's fee, you have to talk to your lender, and they'll give you a printout and explain everything to you of how much it's going to run you, and you can also get concessions for them, but they'll typically run you anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000.
Yeah, it's typical that way, and something too is I think sometimes, Michelle, that it's the stress of the buyer immediately because they go into the lender. And the lender must, once they get signed up with that lender, they must give them an estimated CD, which is estimated cost for that loan. And it's a truth in lending form. But what I think happens is there's so many numbers and so much activity that you actually forget to go back to that. And so sometimes when you're seeing that, and the lenders have to be very close. I can't remember what the percentage is that they have to be close to that loan.
I don't know.
But you of all people should know that. But I think that it's the stress of that. And so we're reminding them, like when we go under contract, we often give them a readout. Here's an estimate of cost of what you're going to have to either give at the closing or get at the closing. But the buyers, we tend to think, well, the lender's got that.
Yeah.
Lender's got that. And I think sometimes we just need to remind them that there are costs.
Well, there's lender's costs, but there are also real estate costs.
Right.
And so when we say, oh, yeah, the lender will get it, well, yeah, they'll get their end, but we need to get our end.
Right,
so
right.
We just want to go over a few things. So some of the things, like there is title insurance, which typically is, I shouldn't say typically, but is often paid for by the seller.
Right, that's an owner's policy. And I do know different areas and different states do different things different. But very typically in our area, the seller will buy an owner's policy that is based on the price of the house. So that policy comes forward. It can be thousands of dollars, a couple thousand, depending on the price of the house. But often the buyer also has to have a policy as well.
Right. And their cost is $75. There's also an addition section that we can go buyer or seller, so your agent can negotiate that. But they also have a policy. We also have an insurance policy. This is just an example that we're using. Is $400.
Well, and that was for the lender.
Right.
So when the buyer has to get title insurance, they're getting a smaller policy than what the seller has to give, typically in our area. But they may be paying for a small policy that's above and beyond things that are not recorded, or that's always negotiable between buyer and seller. But the one that you're talking about that could be like around $400, that's for the lender. The buyer must buy insurance for the lender. It's a title policy for the lender. But we forget sometimes about that, or depending on the cost of that. So title work is going to be a cost for both parties, more than likely, but the buyer does have a charge in that.
And like I said, that is the one I think I usually miss because it's on the lender side. So I don't think about it when I discuss the fees to that buyer.
Right.
We also have a tax certificate we have to pay is $26. And that's just those three in this policy. Those are 3 title policies, and that right there is $500.
Yeah. So it is, things to think about. Now, many times, again, they're not bringing that cash in hand a lot of times. A lot of times it's rolled into the loan. And especially for something like VA, which is 100%, it is going to be rolled in the loan. But it's something that you come at the end and you're like, wow, what was all that for? Yeah, even if it's rolled in the loan. I mean, we really need to be really diligent about telling them about some of these prices that are going on. And one of them is closing fees. And we're not talking about closing for the loan. Like that, many times your lender charge you closing cost. And that's associated directly with the loan.
Right.
But closing fees, for what I'm saying, is about the title company. It's what it is to close that real estate part of that property.
They have to do all that paperwork
Right.
and all that stuff and actually do the closing.
Right.
And typically it's about $250.
Uh-huh.
And it's split usually 50-50.
And I would say very typically we do split it 50-50 because both parties have to arrive to make this happen.
Yeah.
So we do. And it's like $130 a piece or something like that. But the one that we often forget is the title fee for closing the loan. Mm-hmm. So when the title company gets the paperwork, like, wait a minute, it's VA. And you're going through and your arm hurts from signing, that costs to go over that. And it's, just an estimate of one of the prices was like $250 to close that loan.
Yeah.
So that's one additional fee that the title company themselves get for closing.
They charge that. So we also have some recording fees. We have a deed of trust recording fee. It's just $78. A warranty deed is $13. I think that one's split on this one. Maybe not. I was thinking that one was a little bit more.
But the $78 you have to think about, even if it was like $13 a page, when you're recording the deed of trust, that's your mortgage. Mm-hmm. So it could be several pages that you are recording. And so that's why it's a little higher. I mean, you're going to have a little higher, where the warranty deed is one page that you have to record.
Right.
And a doc fee.
And a doc fee.
So that doc fee in our state and in our area is 1 cent per dollar spent. So if that house was something like $380,000, it's going to be $38. So it's something that to remember that goes to our state for our doc fee.
Yep. And so then we also have to think about where you're purchasing. So if you're purchasing in an HOA where they have an HOA, you might need to pay a transfer fee. We also need to pay for usually depending when you purchase it, say we close in March, you're paying as the buyer from March until the end of December, and the seller will pay from just January until March.
Right.
So it's not the entire homeowners association for that year. If it's done monthly, it's differently. But usually, so that's split, that's prorated between the buyer and seller. If they have any outstanding association fees, that's usually typically paid by the seller.
Yes.
But that, again, is part of your contract, so make sure that is noted in your contract who's paying any current fees.
And these transfer fees came about, and I'm going to say they're really not that old for Colorado, maybe 5 to 6 years ago, is because the HOAs have to give so much information to the buyer through the associations where we didn't used to have to do that. Now it's written within the contract, and they could have documents just as big as their signing documents, that's all about their HOA. So they do start charging to give that information, to transfer this from the buyer to the seller. And you see a lot of HOAs doing that now.
It's very expensive if you have a big, nice size. I think just for instance, just think of like Cobble Creek or someplace like that where you have a bunch of houses.
Right.
And you're transferring several houses throughout the year for that HOA to take care of all that and to monitor that, print everything off, send it, and then issue everything with the new owner's information on it.
Right.
So
no, you're right. I think it can be costly for something like that. And there's also for the buyer, not often is there is a utility deposit, but it's usually a small one about water. It's mainly a transfer because you have to transfer the water into your name. That is the only the only utility that can actually lien a property is water. And so that same thing on the seller's side could be actually a deposit. Like they're giving money to escrow to pay off that bill. So that buyer has a clean title and that bill's all paid off. But usually to transfer.
There's usually a transfer fee on the
And
buyer
that's
side.
really the buyer side.
Right.
For us, typically it's $50 if you're in town. If you're out of town with different municipalities who service water, it could be cheap. It could be $25 or something like that. But it's usually a transfer fee to the buyer.
That's not too bad. And the other thing about water transfer fees, irrigation water. So
Yes.
we have those now.
That's really something for us to remember and think about because, yes, and the water's very important in Colorado, and especially in western Colorado. So when water goes with the land, you have to know that has to transfer. So some of those bills could be as much as $500 to transfer irrigation. It is rare, but that would be a bigger parcel of something like that. But something to be aware of, both buyer and seller would be negotiating who's going to pay that transfer fee. Who's going to get that water? So not always is it the buyer has to put out for that, but it's irrigation water depending on the price, and it's all negotiated within the contract.
And then I think we have taxes. We need to prorate those, kind of like our HOA stuff. So you pay for the taxes for the year behind you.
Right, so we pay them in the rears.
Yep. So the seller typically has to make sure that all of those are paid up to the time that they bought it. The buyer usually gets a credit.
Yeah,
you don't have very many on your statement, but you'll get a credit for next year's, because next year you will pay that year.
The whole year taxes. Yeah. So in other words, the seller owns it on January 1. They sell it on March 15th. The seller's responsible for January 1 to March 15th to credit to that buyer. Now, if you're having a loan, more than likely that credit's going to go somewhere like in an escrow account.
So you won't see it.
So you won't see it because you're going to have to, your payment alone will be part of that for that escrow. But, it's just part of it that we have to make sure we maintain, and that will go along with insurance. Let's talk about that too. So the buyer may be purchasing a whole year of insurance that they have to put in an escrow account for their lender. Right. So not only are they paying the whole year so that the lender knows that year is taken care of, but they may be escrowing like a couple months, 2 to 3 months additional. So that's where the fees really come in. It's not like you're paying it all out and you're not getting anything back. You actually are buying a policy. It's just securing you for a longer amount of time, so you wouldn't have to purchase that any other time.
Right.
So those fees, even though they're just not gone to the wind, is what I'm trying to get at. Well, you might feel like they are, but you're actually purchasing something that goes with it. Right. And that's a lot of things with the lender. Let's just say an appraisal. Now, sometimes lenders will require that the buyer purchase the appraisal up front. And so there could be monies out from that, but other times we will see them on the closing statement that the buyer's purchasing the appraisal. And you might see an ILC, which is an improvement location certificate, and that may be purchased at the time of the closing as well. And it's like a mini survey. It's not a survey, but it's like a survey, which shows the improvements on the property. And I've seen it often on a closing statement for the buyer. So it would have been things that they may have had to do up front, but the lender's allowing them to do it at the very end. And sometimes it's rolled in.
That's true.
Sometimes it's rolled into the loan.
I think the rest are pretty much all
like a credit report, interest. It's interest on your loan, and that comes along with the lender when you're going to close. So
and they'll explain all that to you and show you all those fees up front. But just in general, you kind of get an idea that it is costly. There's a lot of fees that you need to be aware of. So ask your lender and your realtor up front so you're not shocked. I think I just purchased a new home and I was still shocked. Even though I think everybody's shocked.
But I always do remind that if it is rolled into your loan, there's always a rule of thumb that we hear from our lenders, and that is every $10,000 is an additional $50 on your mortgage. So when we think of some of these big loans that roll everything in, they're really not putting all the cash out front.
Right.
it's in the end because maybe they're paying an extra $50 or $25 even if it's half that, $5,000, an extra $25. So it really depends on the lender, how much we have to put down. But the seller also has fees that come in. They have commissions that are for agents. They have fees, payoffs of banks. Like if you have a mortgage on your property, you have to pay that off. They have title, like we talked about with the title. Many times they have that title and the escrow of the water, because this is the case where, once again, the title company wants to make sure that the buyer is purchasing the property without any liens on it.
Clear.
So you may end up putting out $300 or $400. You could get it back because they're going to pay that last bill.
And then send you a refund, usually within 30 days.
Right. But there are times too a loan will require maybe some things be fixed. Maybe because of an appraisal that says this will appraise for this, but this roof has to be fixed or something like that that's negotiated with the seller. And many times you'll see an escrow of the seller for things to be fixed in a certain amount of time. So for both parties, there's going to be charges. But like Michelle says, we just need to make sure that we are telling our buyers that, and make sure that they're looking at their information from their lender. Because once again, I think some of that, Michelle, is just the stress of the moment. They're not pulling that information back out. And if we can get it, that would be great for us to have on the file just to remind them. Here are those fees that are going to be happening.
Right, and we do get a settlement statement right before closing, and it really is important that your appraiser or your agent goes over that with you.
Yes.
And sometimes I know they don't, and the lenders should be going over their part too. So you shouldn't be shocked at the settlements at the table.
And actually, it's contractual. In the contract, it says that you will get those numbers ahead of time. Because I think maybe they didn't. Maybe it was a shock of what they needed to bring or not to bring. But I think with our contract changing, our diligence, because we're very diligent about making sure that our buyers and sellers understand what's going to happen at the closing table. And I know not everybody is, but we are. So putting that to rest, we're going to say, hey, it costs money to sell and buy.
It does.
It does.
But it's usually worth it.
But it's usually worth it. You're so right. So with that, we want to thank you for being a part of Real Talk for Real Estate. Remember to check us out on Facebook for sure on Fridays, because we do our virtual open houses. And it's getting spring. So if you are interested in listing, having a cost market analysis on your property, whether it's for having a loan, getting a upfront loan on your property so that you can do something like marry your daughter off. Well, that would be me. But call us. We'll tell you what your property's worth.
Absolutely.
We'll give you a good idea. And Michelle and I are here at the real estate store, and we'd love to hear from you. So with that, thanks, guys.
Bye.